Fantastic. Apparently we're live, so we can start our workshop. Welcome everyone. My name is Cédric Demeus. I work for Holcim. Holcim is a construction material company, including roofing, including cement and concrete. I'm delighted to see you all here. We're going to talk about circularity in the built environment. I say we because I hope you're going to ask lots of questions. If you don't, I'll pick on you. Yes, I will. You can count on me. Before I ask my fellow panelists to come on the stage, I'd just like to set the picture. At Holcim, we're on a mission to bring with us as much of the construction value chain to move towards circular models and decarbonize construction. What does it mean for us as a company? I'll give you three figures, 5, 8, and 20. By 2030, we ambition to capture at least 5 million tons of CO2. By 2030, we will put on the market minimum 8 million tons decarbonized cement and concrete. By 2030, we will upcycle a minimum of 20 million tons construction and demolition materials. And that's the last bit about which we will focus our discussion today. Circularity can be transformative for us. We have a great target, but on our own we can't do it. Absolutely not. So we need the value chain, we need tools, we need cities, we need architects. And that's why I'm so proud to welcome fantastic experts from across the value chain. First, Laurie Ferris from Architecture 2030. Can you join me? Eva Hinkers from the well-known Arab engineers constructing all over the world. Andrew Minson, wearing today the Concrete Sustainability Council hat. And finally, Leon Diaz from ICLEI, representing cities. So, welcome to you all. Let's set the scene with a generic question I will ask to all of you. I know some of you have a few slides to help the introduction, but we'll ask with you. You don't have slides, no? So I'll start with you, Eva, and then Leon, I'll go to you, and then Laurie, and then Andrew. Let's start with a fairly generic question. Circularity in the built environment can mean many different things. What does it mean for your organization? Is it about construction demolition waste? Is it about building codes and standards? Is it about procurement? Is it about technology? How do you approach it in your organization? What does it mean for you? So Eva, let's start with you.
Yeah, happy to start. And do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. So, as you said in the introduction, Cédric, we're an engineering firm, we're in consultancy. So for us, it really goes across the whole life cycle of a building. And as engineers and architects, I think we have a special responsibility, a really big responsibility, because I see a very strong analogy between the commercial efficiency of a building and circularity. And you set really the basement for that at very, very early on in a project. So that is where you really decide, how much is a building going to cost in the end, and how circular is it going to be. So you really have to start from the very, very beginning, often even before there's a project concept. So it's a very different mindset to designing buildings than we used to. It's not just making it more efficient. It is really a completely new approach. So in order to support that, we developed with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation a circular building toolkit, which really leads you through the various stages of a project and making sure that at the end of it, it is as circular as it can possibly be. And this might sound really weird to come from an engineer, but the first thing really to think about is, do we really need to build? Is that really necessary, or do we have different answers? And then really to build for the long term so that building can have different lives and can be different things over their lives. So really this transform rather than divest, I think, has really arrived in the industry now. And then, of course, building as efficiently as we can and choosing the right materials. I think these 4 things are really, really important. And that's where we focus. But we've also committed, and the industry is now more and more taking that on board across all engineering firms, is to really measure whole life carbon on buildings. Because without knowing what your carbon on the building is and being able to compare the different building options, I mean, how do you know what good looks like? So we've measured carbon on more than 1,400 projects over the last 2 years, and we now have a really good data bank that informs what the benchmarks are for the different building typologies, and how you have to intervene in these buildings to get them to net zero. Well, that's a big word for embodied, but by 2050 that's a goal. So the other thing that we have a responsibility for is also influencing policymakers. And that's where the building breakthrough comes in, that we all across the globe align with the building breakthrough agenda of decarbonizing buildings operationally by 2030 and reducing embodied, and that's where the circular economy comes in, by 40% by 2030. So that, I think, in a nutshell, is where we're focusing.
That's a great introduction, Eva. And let me, we'll come back onto the policy framework, because I would like to explore that a little bit. But let me go straight with a follow-up question with you. You said, the point here is to intervene as early as possible in the project, and that's what you engineers are doing. What are the stumbling blocks that you are facing today that stops you in either in doing it or in doing it more than you would advise to do?
Well, I think they're actually at that early stage, the stumbling blocks are reducing, I would say. There are more and more clients very keen to align the buildings with, with the policies that, and I live in Europe, I probably should say that. So there are very clear regulations in place and policies. So that has really, I think, created a level playing field for the industry. So clients are very keen to take circular economy on board. They're very keen to see how they can avoid their assets to become stranded at some stage, for new build, but also, and that's what we see more and more, for existing buildings. So how do we intervene in existing buildings? How do we transform them in a circular way? So I think at that early stage, the blockers are getting less and less, definitely in Europe. Where I see blockers is in the supply of the right materials and the right products later on. So I don't think that supply and demand is yet aligned.
Great. It's fantastic to hear that you start seeing the demand coming. I just come from the First Movers Coalition session, which is about putting supply in front of demand and vice versa. So it's great to hear it's advancing in your area. Let's turn to cities, the perspective of local authorities. Leon, you work for ICLEI. ICLEI is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, network of local authorities. What does circularity in construction mean for you guys?
Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Hear. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so thank you for the introduction. I work with ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, and we are a global network of more than 2,500 cities, towns, and regions in 125 countries. And that means that we operate across different geographies. And I think the issue of circularity in the built environment is kind of regionally nuanced. And in some countries, it's really about building efficiencies and building standards and kind of integrating those renewable building materials into the building stock, and in other contexts it can also be more about the sourcing of materials and are there locally regenerative materials available. We are mostly working then with the public sector, of course, so our members, the different local governments, and we really try to understand from them what are their challenges and what can we offer to them as a network. So we have around 500 experts in-house on sustainable urban development. What kind of push and assistance can we provide to them to really pick them up where they are and help them to go on their own sustainability journey? And it doesn't matter too much if they're now one of the most sustainable cities in the world already, or if they're just in the beginning of their journey. And so we work more on the public policy side, on the different levers that they may be. We've published with IHRB a kind of a handbook on different public policy levers. And of course, procurement is a big lever. It depends always in each country. The municipality has different powers and responsibilities. Some actually have, in the public procurement side, they have a lot of room to shape certain guidelines and set certain standards. And in others, it's very broad in the beginning.
Great, fantastic. Let's leave it at that for now. I will come back to you. I would like to explore a little bit the idea of public-private cooperation and how this could be enhanced to accelerate the adoption of circular construction practices, and how engineers need to be or can be more involved, how material providers need to be, and what the expectations. But we'll come back to that in a moment. Let's get a perspective from designers and architects. So, Laurie, I will let you introduce yourself. Floor is over to you. I think you have a few slides to show.
Oh, yeah.
So perhaps we can slide to the side. Are you equipped with a slider? Yeah. Okay.
No.
No, it's not on. So take this one. It's on now.
It's on. It is on now. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Laurie Ferris, a senior fellow with Architecture 2030 and a practicing architect as well as structural engineer working at the nexus of existing building reuse and climate action. All right, this works. So Architecture 2030 is a global nonprofit whose mission is to decarbonize the built environment and really transform buildings from a cause of climate change to a central solution. One of our priority themes to accomplish this is that building reuse is inherently climate action. We know that in order to achieve a zero carbon world, we have to address our existing buildings, not just think about sustainable new construction. The most recent IPCC report estimates that we have to increase our rate of renovation from less than 1% annually around the globe to up to 5% or as high as 10%. So we've really got a ways to go here. And the reason building reuse is such an impactful lever for decarbonization is because when we reuse an existing building, we address the entire life cycle. We both reduce operational emissions associated with using a building through energy efficiency, through electrification, but we also reduce embodied carbon by minimizing the demand for new materials to be produced. And whole building reuse is really one end of a spectrum of circularity. Of course, we have deconstruction and salvage, we have material recycling as well, but we're really focused on whole building reuse because when you reuse the most permanent parts of a building, the structure and the envelope, they have the highest embodied carbon typically, which means that you're going to realize the greatest climate benefits. All right. Of course, we've talked about this. We really need a culture shift to achieve circularity within the built environment. We are starting to see some progress. This recent Billings report, for example, last year from the American Institute of Architects found that for the first time in its recorded history, architects in the United States are making more money reusing buildings, renovating them, than they are from new construction. We're seeing this manifest in design culture as well. Several years ago, Lacton and Vassal won the Pritzker Prize, the most prestigious design award globally for their careers work dedicated to transforming existing and historic assets. So I think we are seeing progress, but we know we have a long ways to go. And so I was part of the team with Architecture 2030 that developed the CARE tool, the Carbon Avoided Retrofit Estimator, which is an online tool that tries to provide directional decision-making information about the climate benefits of reuse, retrofit compared to new construction. And to the point about getting in early. The idea with this tool is that you use it before you have enough detailed information to perform a whole building life cycle assessment, to do a full carbon accounting, because by the time you have that detail, it's really often too late to decide if you're going to reuse a building, either in thinking about policymaking or as a building owner. So that's what we're trying to do here. And what it enables is that we can look at a building. We can, for example, recent renovation I worked on, and this single building through the year 2030, its reuse and retrofit has avoided carbon emissions of about 4 million kilograms of carbon dioxide. We scale this up to a campus, a small liberal arts college, which is committed to achieving carbon neutrality by the year 2037. And their approach to stewardship and retrofit will avoid emissions of approximately 115 million kilograms of carbon dioxide through their carbon neutrality date. And to put that into perspective, if they planted a forest over their entire 100-acre Arboretum campus, that forest would have to grow for more than 1,300 years to draw down that amount of carbon dioxide. So these are big numbers. And just coming back to this idea, I want to close with the idea that we need to really continue to scale this up. We need a paradigm shift. I don't think we're going to make the case only talking about embodied carbon. We have to really value the assets we already have, and this goes beyond environmental value to cultural value, to the embodied knowledge of historic and traditional buildings, to the embodied memory of all the places where we live, work, and play, and really, kind of rethink our built environment to scale up circularity together. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laurie. And stay there. I've got one follow-up question. You talk about renovation, which of course must be a focus. I'm also based in Europe. The European Union launched a program which is called the renovation rate, and the basis of it is that renovation rate today in Europe is at less than 1%. I find this number staggering. The aim of the renovation wave and renovation program is to bring it to more than 3%, which is still quite low, and it's not picking up. I don't know what the rate of renovation is in the US, but how do you observe the trend going? And is the renovation rate still as low also as low in the United States?
Yeah, it's quite low. I think it's a little bit higher than that, between 1% and 2%. We are seeing it climb, but to your point, how do we get from 1% to 2% with maybe a small slope up to 5% to 10%, or ideally much greater? I think we have a long ways to go.
And what do you think would help accelerate that?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself with the questions here, but I think a number of market drivers, policies, we'll get there.
Let's park it for now. Let's keep on the introductions. So I'm now going to call on to Andrew. Andrew has a few slides as well. Andrew, you represent here the Concrete Sustainability Council. This is the concrete industry that came up with a labeling/certification scheme that embeds circularity. Do you want to show us what it's all about?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. So just as the slides come up, your question was, what does it mean to me? So the OECD issued a report a few years ago, and it had a really useful catchphrase, which was close the loop. We all know that. Circularity is closing the loop. But they also said narrow the loop, okay, less resource efficiency, slow the loop, so let's go around that loop less. Eva, I think they missed a trick. So your first line would have been no loop. Don't build no loop. So no loop, close the loop, slow the loop, and narrow the loop with efficiency. So I invited the Concrete Sustainability Council, the responsible sourcing scheme. Oh, we're there, sorry. Concrete responsible sourcing scheme. So you've probably heard of forestry stewardship scheme, which came out in the late 1990s because of the problem with illegal logging. And the concrete industry said, well, hang on, we've got a very short supply chain in lots of the developed world. Well, lots of the world and lots of the developed world, we're doing responsible sourcing anyway. Let's get the credit for that. So if you're a designer and you're not aware of this, please be aware of this, because you should be specifying. In the context of circular economy, the issue is that within this scheme, and you'll quickly read these things as I talk, this is all the things that the responsible sourcing scheme has a metrication on for concrete. So you can see the environmental, the social, the economics, the prerequisites on the far left in terms of slavery, etc. You'd expect that from responsible sourcing. So it's for concrete, but concrete has constituents on the left of cement and fly ash, so they have a certification as well. And on the right-hand side, concrete also needs aggregates, and so this is where the recycling comes in. There's a module within the CSC for recycled aggregates. So you can have that circularity sort of embedded in. Now, how might you use certification of your products that are CSC certified? Well, you're probably more familiar with the right-hand side, these building assessment schemes. So LEED is there, BREEAM, DGMB. Those schemes are they recognise Forestry Stewardship Scheme, but they also recognise CSC as well. So you can procure your concrete to be responsibly sourced. So that's good news. Now, I also work for the Concrete Centre. I haven't introduced myself. I worked for a designer for 10 years. So I'm a structural engineer, and we're all involved in the built environment. And let's hope that the scales are that the benefits on the right outweigh the impacts on the left. So some of the benefits on the right I've got there. I don't know if you're familiar with that language. The language here is the targets of the SDGs. So how many goals are there? You got to get in the quiz mode here. 17. How many targets are there behind the 17? I don't know. Does anyone know? 169. 169. So UNOPS, United Nations, they said, hang on, we fund infrastructure around the world. Well, how much does infrastructure deliver to the SDGs? 121 out of the 169. That's quite interesting, isn't it? So actually, working for the concrete industry, I thought, well, hang on, what's the answer for concrete? So just as a quick reminder, there are the 17. So if 121 was infrastructure, how many do you think concrete has a direct influence in delivering on the SDGs? You can do that in your head. I won't embarrass you. Oh, so 168 out of 169. I did the assessment myself. I went through each of these 169 targets. I did it so that I could absolutely defend every one. If you did it, I guarantee you would get more than I got as a number. Because if I was in doubt, I didn't count it. 81. 81. Your number would be higher than that. I guarantee it, because if I was any shade of doubt, I didn't count it. 81. So we need concrete. So in the argument of circularity, we need concrete. Okay, I'll go back. People want to take a photo of that. That's great. 81. There's a reference on the top right, if you want to read the paper, that justifies that. Very happy to share the spreadsheet where I did it. And you'll get a number higher. Okay, so why? Why is it 81 out of 169? It's because of all these benefits on the left-hand side. We mustn't forget, you can read those, you mustn't forget the lessons that we've learned over time. We need to change, we need to do innovative things, we need to do things in a new way. We have to do that. Let's not forget some really obvious things of the past. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I'd show it with reluctance. You're a private audience. Is this going out or not? No. Yes. Okay. This was a tragedy in the UK stemming from wanting to do the right thing and insulate buildings but doing it wrong. But thank goodness it was a non-combustible material, because otherwise the disaster would have been even worse. Let's not forget some of the lessons we've learnt in the past about safety of buildings. If we're going to do new things, let's make sure we do it right. I'm very happy to talk about that later. It's a really versatile material, so it's got great performance benefits. It's a very versatile material. All of this is concrete. I won't go through it, and it can be built in different ways. So, you know, I could spend hours talking about this. It's a really versatile material. That's why it's used so much. That's why it delivers 81 out of 169 SDGs. But we know we've got a carbon footprint problem, so the industry committed to a net zero roadmap. This is boring, isn't it? Everyone's got a net zero roadmap. Everyone's got a net zero roadmap. So why is this interesting? It's interesting because his CEO, her CEO, his CEO, is there anyone else in the room? His CEO, they committed to this. That's why this matters in 2021. That's why that matters. So I will talk circularity. Circularity here, we've got some designers in the room, which is great. So they'll talk about circularity here, efficiency in design. Efficiency in concrete production, we've heard about recycling of material, crushed concrete aggregate, other hard stuff from demolition can go into concrete. And I've got a couple of slides on this. Some of that crushed stuff, innovatively, isn't just being used as aggregate into the concrete, but it's actually, even the binding content of it is being used. Up to 20% of the cement can be, the high carbon intensive cement can be reduced by crushed demolition waste back in. That's fantastic.
1 minute.
And that much. So, circularity in terms of waste materials from society. Waste materials from society in landfill and incinerators emit CO2, separate from the CO2 that we emit in the kiln. What if you take that CO2 and that waste that's in landfill and you put it in the cement kiln? that width of that CO2 is the CO2 that's going to be emitted anyway in producing the cement that society needs to deliver 81 out of 169 SDGs. So let's get rid of that CO2. And actually, the calculation in some parts of the world is even more extreme because some of this landfill delivers methane 20 times, depending on what time horizon, much worse than CO2. So therefore, let's do the circularity on our waste in a more efficient way. India roadmap, a few specific examples. We'll talk about Europe a lot and North America a lot because circularity and building and material banks applies there. There's a lot of building that has to happen here. A lot of building. So what do they say about circularity? Well, they're already on the design side. They're talking about reuse of concrete elements. They're talking about reduction of wastage through the process. And they're slowing. Remember I said slow the loop. Extend the service life, slow the loop down. They're also talking about, in the binders, using supplementary cementitious materials. Look at the increase in supplementary cementitious materials from 2020 to 2050. In some parts of the world, there isn't going to be as much fly ash around from coal-fired power stations. But look at the forecast in India for 2020, 2030, 2050. The blue is fly ash in 7 years' time, in 27 years' time. Look how much fly ash they've still got available. Look how much slag in the red they've got available. They've still got these byproducts from industrial processes from other industries that we can use in a circular way into our industry to reduce the CO2 footprint of our product. That's circularity.
So that was your fabulous crash course on circularity in the cement industry by Professor Minson. Thank you so much. Can I invite you to come back on stage? The next thing I would like to address is we need to accelerate. We start seeing demand. We start having industrial responses. We start having local authorities asking themselves the questions: how do we accelerate that? We've got very clear design perspectives on how we can address it. So what do we need to accelerate that transition? Is it a question of norms? Is it a question of technology? Is it a question of regulation? Laurie, do you want to give us a perspective?
Okay, sure. I have a few different answers. Maybe I'll just start with codes and standards. I think one of the challenges we see in reusing buildings and materials is that they aren't often governed by the same codes and standards that we have for new construction. And so there's a certain element of risk for building owners, for jurisdictions. And even though, often we know that building materials that are 100 years old or older are of a higher quality, more durable and more repairable than what we might replace them with today. So I think this is one gap. If we can do the materials testing, get certification, and work into our codes the allowed use and reuse of more arcane materials and systems, I think this will really, again, de-risk the whole process and enable an acceleration of circularity both at the materials and the building scale.
And a follow-up question: is there in your professional circle, is there still this perception that if you have, let's say, a concrete with a high proportion of recycled aggregates into it, it's not going to be as good a quality as the standard OPC-based concrete? Or are we overcoming these perceptions?
I think we're overcoming, at least in my market, we're overcoming those perceptions. I'm working on a regional decarbonization working group right now in New England. And I do think this issue of the sort of skepticism of introducing SCMs, we've mostly overcome. There's still a lot of work to do, particularly with the people installing the concrete, again, coming back to risk. Those who, if it's going to get pinned on them if something goes wrong. So I think the people who install it and are used to working with a certain mix of cement, we still have some, kind of education and work to do with that group, but I think overall we're seeing a lot more comfort.
Great. Leon, you're surrounded here by private sector practitioners. They all have solutions. How can they help you? How can they help your members, the cities? Is there a need for more public-private cooperation in the space of circularity? What's your view?
Is this on?
Yeah, it's on. You just have to speak a bit loud.
Sure. I think the issue of public-private partnership can offer, can offer value in certain contexts. And I think in the circularity space, I think cities need to set the incentives together with other government entities. There needs to be a coordination mechanisms to assure the different entities that have the right responsibilities actually then create the enabling environment for these measures to go forward. When it comes to the public-private partnership, I think sometimes people are very visual. And they really, I think sometimes they need to kind of be able to see and touch certain things. And if you can make like a private, and one example is that you could do a public-private partnership in a very public building or a very central location of the city. And if that is kind of a good case demonstration for circular building, that can actually also raise the interest and awareness of the general public. Because I think in some contexts, just the awareness is not there on the ground. Not just on the individual building level, but also, I mean, the type of urban form that you choose as a local government to enable in your city, that has to do a lot with like land use policy and like tendering of public land. Like different urban forms have a different kind of material consumption because of the infrastructure needs. And I think, yeah, that's kind of another level for cities. And I won't give you the general statement on public-private partnerships because it's very contextualized, but I think if you really think it through to the very detailed level, then there can be a lot of added value in certain contexts.
You were telling us at the beginning in your introduction that ICLEI as a secretariat is working and it is helping cities in their transition with engineers and others. The feedback you get from the cities, what is that they're facing? What are their biggest problems? What are their biggest perhaps fears or roadblocks that they are facing today?
I think it's very contextualized. We have a great city in Finland who is really trying to understand in the region what are the different resource flows and how I think the city wants to be climate neutral by, don't quote me wrong, but I think 2028 or something. They have done a whole exercise to map the resource flow across the region to really understand where they can kind of tip in and reduce further and kind of create further synergies. And other cities, I think they're just at the starting point. They really need to understand what alternatives do we have in terms of building materials locally available. How can we get them? What can we do to incentivize that there's maybe more production of these, that they're actually accessible to these cities? So I think it's very, there's a large scale of what the cities need based on where they are.
Sure. Eva, let me turn to you. From your perspective, what do you need to accelerate, to work with more cities, more private sector actors, more real estate developers to embed circularity in what you do and roll out all of the expertise that you have at Arup around the world?
Yeah. So maybe I say something about public-private,
Of course.
not partnership, but collaboration.
And by the way, just interject if you want. Do not hesitate to interject.
Yeah. So, I don't mean PPP in its true sense that we understand the term usually in the way we procure big projects, but in collaboration between private and public sector. And what we see a lot is that, especially in the infrastructure space, the public clients are generally super interested in what's being done elsewhere and how they can adopt that. So I think there's a lot of curiosity about, what another transport client, infrastructure client has done in country A and how you can bring that to your own country and how you can learn from each other. And, we see that we can play we do play a really great role in bringing those clients together and learn from each other like you do in the city space. It's the same thing. We don't all have to go through the same learning curves, but we can be conveners of those collaborations and learning from each other. And that, I think, is a great way of accelerating the agenda.
Let me follow up on that. Myself, I've organized a number of initiatives this week where I put around the table a large representation of the value chain, like we have in front of us here. And I've received so many comments. This is so great. We lack forum where we have the value chain sitting together. Why is that? Maybe is that something that we should create in permanence?
The coming together and sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's why we're here. No, I mean, this is we all have done something in that space, and I think it needs a generosity to share what you've developed. Like, you talked about your care product that is your care tool that is openly available. The circular building toolkit that I spoke about earlier, it's free to use for everyone. We don't keep it to ourselves. It's on the EMF platform. Anyone can use it. Anyone can use it on their project. And I think it needs that generosity to say, I don't use that as my competitive advantage. I want the industry to use it. Or also the data that I talked about earlier. We're not keeping that to ourselves, close to our chest and saying this is our data, we're not sharing it. On the contrary, it's so important that we share it and that we share it with, our partners, our collaborators, and use it to make informed decisions. So, that kind of generosity with our knowledge is really important for a faster transition.
Great.
And we can give a plug to GABC, because that's exactly what they try and do and do all year, is the value chain coming together.
Yeah, great. Keep the microphone on, Andrew. Give us your perspective on how we can accelerate. You've given us a crash course in circularity in concrete. I'll repeat that. So you've given us a crash course on circularity in concrete. You talked at the beginning about the certification scheme. Is this kind of tool a way to accelerate, to get circular products adopted in the market? How do you see it?
So definitely another plug for the Concrete Sustainability Council scheme. Definitely look that up. That definitely is a good one. If I go to two ends of the spectrum, one end of the spectrum would be tax regime in countries advantaging new build over retrofit and long life and reuse. So that definitely happens in some countries. So if you've got that wrong tax regime, then you're biasing against doing the right thing in terms of reuse of building. If I go to the other end of the spectrum, just a real niche one, but we're all citizens. We're all citizens. What happens to our waste? Honestly, the right policies in Europe mean that there are kilns operating on 80-90% of municipal waste that the industry can't do anything, non-recyclable waste that the society can't do anything with, and that's going into kilns and saving fossil fuels. It's such a no-brainer. The right policies are in place. Global average, 6%. So that colourful diagram I showed, our target is to get to 23% by 2030, over 40% by 2050, but we need the right policies in place to be able to do that.
Let me follow up with a question where we started, the Concrete Sustainability Council. It's a tool that is there for procuring sustainable, including circular concrete. Some here in the room might think, yeah, but that's just concrete. I'm going to purchase other material. Is this tool going to communicate with other labeling scheme that exists for the? Where is this going? Where is the space of this labeling and certification going?
Okay, so the forestry one already exists. Responsible steel, someone I'm hoping is going to jump in here. Maybe, do you know about responsible steel? Responsible steel does it for steel, and obviously for the steel industry, there's the circularity is reuse of scrap. But just on that all the scrap is currently being used. So we just want to be a little bit careful in this space that we don't incentivize circularity of materials here. All these people are doing the right thing, and these people are not doing the right thing, and therefore product that could be used on your projects is transported to these projects because these guys are all saying, yes, let's use recycled materials, and you increase the amount of transportation that's going on. So we just need to be a little bit aware of that. We went through that loop in the UK at one stage where companies were incentivizing recycled concrete aggregates, but actually the industry was using all the recycled concrete aggregates possible in the most efficient way, but these clients were prepared to pay a bit more for it, so therefore we increased transport. It didn't increase the amount of recycling at all, it just increased the CO2. So we need to be a little bit careful that we don't fall into that trap.
Great. Now, let's move to public policy. This is a big driver. I would love to equip you, Leon, with the five policy ideas that you can bring to your city network. So let's try to do that. What for all our panelists? What public policy, in your perspective, would help to accelerate the entrance on the market of circular solutions, or the adoption of circularity in design, in architecture? Laurie, how do you see things?
Okay, I'm going to say two. And Andrew, you've already mentioned tax incentives, so I'm not going to say that. But the other two that I want to mention, firstly, is about, what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. Deconstruction policies, I think, in the United States have been hugely successful at the local level, first in Vancouver and recently in other cities, Pittsburgh and San Antonio. And I think the city's role in piloting those policies has been so valuable, thinking about co-benefits in terms of training local workforces to work with these materials, keeping more money in the local economy, to kind of tangible things like storage, to where do we put all of these materials, and to helping with that. So I think that's one of the big policies. The other approach to policy, I think, has to do with how we measure net zero in the built environment. So I know this has been a big push in Boston, where I live, through net zero zoning, through our emissions disclosure, that it all looks only at operational emissions. And when we don't consider that upfront carbon, oftentimes new buildings will look better, but that's because they're not paying the penalty for all of the materials they're using. So I think we have to start figuring some way to credit building reuse, material reuse upfront when we're looking at the total carbon impacts of buildings.
You mentioned the deconstruction policy in the United States. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
I mean, there are a few. I think Vancouver is the sort of flagship. It's has the longest run so far. It's specifically for residential buildings, but essentially for, and this is common for buildings of over a certain age, you're required to deconstruct rather than tear down. And I think it's made a big impact, and also started to, both as a demonstration for other cities, but it's also creating an economy, a true financial economy around circular materials, that's, starting maybe to tip the financial scales to make it less of a penalty to try and do the right thing.
Just an analogy that makes me think of what we've observed. One of the most successful city policy was in Zurich. A few years back, the city of Zurich started to make mandatory to reuse at least 20% of material in any public construction works in the city. At the beginning, we were scratching our head. A few years down the line, there is a whole value chain that has been created, that has invested in the infrastructure that we need to do it, and has enabled us to put on the market the world's first cement with 20% CDM fines in the cement. Without that city initiatives, it would not have started. So cities have a massive role to play. Leon, I'll come back to you. I'll go to you last. But Eva, to your perspective, please, on how do you see public policies and what public policies can help you in your profession accelerating what you do?
I mean, I must say what we see already is that the Europe Green Deal and the taxonomy that the EU have published have really transformed the market and have really made circular economy approaches on buildings bankable. So I think that's a really good example of how policies can be very effective. I think the other thing that we see, and it's indirectly supporting circular economy approaches, is the benchmark that countries set on how much carbon you can consume per square meter per building. So, Denmark, France, Finland have set clear targets, and they're quite low. And if you want to align with them for new build, you almost must, embed circular economy principles. So those are the two things that I see that are really driving market and really transforming market behavior.
Great. Thank you, Eva. Andrew, same question to you.
Just for Leon, local government. I think landfill typically, you can answer for your own countries, but waste, landfill typically is a local government issue. If you put a tax on landfill, you regulate that, then I got a reassuring nod of the far end. That'll help what Vancouver's doing and those sorts of initiatives. So the demolition waste going back in, it will help our sector get access to materials. So why is it that our sector on recycled aggregates were doing the right thing? It was because of a landfill tax. It was a landfill tax, which meant that actually it was better to be, there's a value on that product.
Great, thank you. That brings me to let's go a bit more granular. I always bang about the same thing, about building codes, standards. We don't have the standards to do that. And the example I just gave you of the Sustaino, the cement that includes 20% CDM fines in Switzerland was made possible because we work with the government to change the standard. Now, to do that in Europe, we've been at it for many years. We'll have it this year, but it's a work that takes five and a half years, I think. So it goes too slow. What about building codes? Building codes is probably the biggest lever to influence procurement and therefore influence the behavior of the value chain. To any of you, do you think, is there something that we can do in the space of public procurement standards, norms, building codes? What's your perspective, any of you?
I'll just jump in to highlight the very exciting news from the United States, which is that California became the first state to embed embodied carbon requirements in its state building code. So Cal Green now requires embodied carbon reductions through 3 compliance pathways, one of which is to reuse at least 45% of an existing building. The others have to do with lower embodied carbon products like concrete or through whole life cycle assessment disclosure. So I think that's to the point about wanting to be able to look to another jurisdiction who's already experimenting with this. I think it's very good news that we have one building code taking this on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, there's a very big influencing piece that you're alluding to, right? How we can collectively influence public sector to take on the right policies that we talked about. But also, you know, I see a big responsibility for us as engineers to work with engineering associations and make sure, I mean, they're very aware of the problem, you know, but it just takes so long for that to be baked into the existing regulations. I totally agree. So we can all only keep banging on about it and, you know, demanding the change faster. Yeah.
You started with public procurement because you've just come from IDDI, where governments are committing to procuring low carbon projects, and there's a private initiative along with FMC, and that will trickle down. So if you're a designer and you're working for a client who wants lowest cost, then it's pretty hard to resist delivering lowest cost. But we can do stuff on carbon optimization. So, you know, on our roadmap, 22% of our roadmap, the delivery, 22% reduction is these people here, designers, doing clever stuff with our material, using it more efficiently, etc. But some of those things are going to take a little bit longer to build, and if it takes longer to build, that's a cost to the client because they can't get utilization and return on that investment. It might be a slightly more expensive process, so the contractor's got a slightly more expensive process, more formwork, more shaping the formwork to have less concrete, but it's more efficiently used. So there's cost in there. So if you just cost optimize, you won't get the right answer. If you carbon optimize, you get a different answer, which is the right answer. But your client ultimately needs to drive that. And so that's where green public procurement comes in.
I'll come back in a minute to IDDI, so and the work that we do there.
Can I 100% support what Andrew just said? You know, just make carbon another currency is really important. I mean, that's really just going to be a big...
Yeah.
I want to add, so I think what we also need to look as beyond the institutional level, we really need to look at the individual level. We need to make sure we mainstream all these principles into education and training programs, both for the individuals that are then kind of making the designs and trying to think about what are going to be the concrete construction process, but also the public officials who are not maybe the heads of the administration, but sit in the administration and in everyday kind of work, they really influence certain outcomes in this regard. And so I think we should really check also the educational and training systems on how can we embed the circularity principles into that, because we know that this industry, I mean, architects, I'm not an architect, but I have friends and family who are architects, and I know they're constantly under pressure to deliver a lot in a very short time. And we need to make it ensure that for them the default is how can I bring in the circularity into all of this, and not can I use my standard design just because it saves me time. That standard design should already meet all the principles that we have. And the second point I wanted to make is that I think the cities where we're seeing the most successful kind of models of engagement and for circularity are those that have existing platforms like roundtables in the local government that bring together all the key actors, from the producers to the designers to the builders, with the local government and create this joint dialogue to see what kind of incentives need to be set by the public side to then also ensure there's uptake on these circularity principles. But because what we certainly don't want to do is have the local government kind of have certain requirements that cannot then be met by the providers.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of architects, engineers, training and equipping, and you're a massive firm. You're doing that in-house, but the professional institutions, get a shout out to them. They're doing fantastic work. I'll say Institute of Structural Engineers in the UK. I know them quite closely. They're doing fantastic stuff. Go to their website and see all the training and all the equipping of engineers that they've got available on their website. And the American Institute of Architects, I know they're extremely active on this as well. And I'm sure others all around the world are. So the professional institutions might not be on this platform here, but they are seeking to address those issues so that when the clients do demand it, they are going to be equipped to be able to deliver.
So let's go back to for a minute to procurement. And focus on carbon for a second. Let's put circularity aside. At Holcim, we've put a brand on the market 2 years ago. It's called EcoPact. We call it low carbon concrete. And our definition is that it's minimum 30% less carbon intensive compared to the national average where it's put on the market, which is standard OPC cement-based concrete. That's our definition. It's a minimum 30%, and it can go all the way down. In some countries, we're at minus 60% with available technologies. Now, that's our definition. It's not the definition used by, I see some of my peers here. They have different definitions. So you're collaborating with the IDDI to move towards a global understanding of what is low carbon concrete, what is near zero concrete. Can you just say a very short word about it? How does it work? It's not finished. It's not finished, but where is that going? And then a question to you: would that help you in making decision as an engineer? Yeah, we have a global understanding of what it may mean. Does that help architects to take the right decision? Would that help cities in their procurement?
Yeah, I'll answer that. That's a big question. Okay, so. We want to have we need to know what we're talking about. So when Eva, Laurie, and as a client, what is low carbon? So IDDI, so the United Nations Industrial Deep Decarbonization Organization, the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative underneath that, sponsored by the Clean Energy Ministerial, which has got maybe 20 countries signatory to it. They all are doing something on low-carbon steel, near-zero steel, low-carbon cement, near-zero cement, and on concrete. Now, the first two, if you want to know about those two, they've pretty much adopted what the IEA defined for those in May 2022, Achieving Zero, a report the IEA produced in 2022. So it's got an E, low-carbon, EDC, like in a fridge. Some of you might have a rating scheme on white goods, EDCBA, and then near zero beneath that. Concrete is a mixture. Concrete's more complicated. Concrete doesn't get transported across borders. Concrete's got different standards around the world, so it's a little bit more complicated. But part of the low carbon cement and concrete initiative to get to zero, part of it is about low carbon procurement. The industry, the material suppliers that I represent, they want low carbon procurement. So they have actively engaged and given us permission as a Secretariat time to engage with the IDDI to try and come up with definitions that are going to work, because there's no point coming up with definitions that then don't work or can't be deliverable. And so we've got an E to A and near zero definition, that white paper that may or may not come out in the next 3 or 4 days or come after, so you look out for it. We'd love to have your comments on it. And it'll mean that there's a definition for your country. I don't know where you're from, but for your country. Turkey, brilliant. From Turkey, from wherever you are, sir, there'll be the same definitions that apply. And there's a mechanism by which you can then, in your countries, because everyone's in a different place on the journey, different countries, they've got different opportunities, and you can place your government, your local authorities, your engineering companies can place different targets, but a band B at your country and a band B for your country will mean the same thing, and there'll be a common language between it, which hopefully will be a mechanism by which there won't be the barrier of, well, we don't know what it means, or it means something different, or is this greenwashing, or he's supplying something and she's supplying something, but are they really the same thing? This will hopefully break that down.
Thank you for that short explanation. So, question is, would that help? Is that something that would be helpful to advance faster, to procure more efficiently? Is this the kind of tool that would help you working with your clients or working with your cities to advance the market? Eva, you seem,
I'll give a very
you seem
short
skeptical.
answer. No, not skeptical at all. I'm just, I think generally, harmonization of what we're talking about, the definitions that we're using, be that on materials, be that when we talk about buildings, harmonization of what that means, classification, transparency, of course. That's what we need, and of course it will help. So I think it's a no-brainer for me. I'm not skeptical at all.
Yeah.
I just think it's obvious, very obvious that it helps.
You think, get on with it.
Yeah.
So you took note, huh?
Yeah.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Laurie, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think having a common measuring stick is always important to make sure we're talking about the same thing. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but of course, as you say, concrete is a very local material, and the supply chains and the markets and the conditions are different in every location. So I'll be curious to see how owners respond to that. For example, in New England, where it's very cold and you do more cement substitution, it takes longer to cure. So working through these regionally specific challenges to achieve the same target will, I think, it's something we'll have to work through. But of course, it's helpful to have a common goal.
And that's exactly, great point. That's exactly why we've disentangled the targets from the definitions. So we wasted quite a long time with people saying, well, the target should be the same, but actually, because of the point you made and others, you've got to disentangle the two. So an A for Eva in one project will mean an A for your, but you might not be able to deliver that because you're doing it in December when it's cold and whatever. Yeah.
Leon, what do you think? How does that speak to you?
I think my answer is actually a mix of both of your answers. No, I think it's good to have more harmonization to kind of simplify certain processes, especially on the international scale, but then we really need to contextualize it locally. We did a study on, in different cities across the world, if you replace the existing building stock or the cement with 5 or 10, 15% of wood, what would be the effects? But then as we reflected on the study, we realized, okay, but wood is also not available equally in each context. So actually you would then really need to see in each city what are the best suited materials for replacing concrete. So it's a mix.
That's great. And I didn't actually formulate my policy wish, which would be exactly what you're mentioning. It's technology and material neutrality. A 1.5 degree aligned building is not a timber or concrete or steel building. It can be a mix of anything. What matters is the life cycle performance of that building, the performance that building needs to have over its life cycle to remain 1.5 degree aligned throughout. And it really doesn't, the material is not the question, it's the performance that is the question. So unfortunately, we are at time. One last question though. What is your number one COP28 wish to accelerate circular and decarbonized construction? Laurie, I'll start with you.
Okay. So my number one wish here, it has to do with collaboration. We're all here face to face, and we've spoken about the major levers of policy and finance, these, the big players in the industry. What we haven't really talked about are all of the people who aren't in this room. We're sitting here beneath the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion. There's so much knowledge around how to live and how to build with circularity embedded in the culture, how to take care of things and repair them over time and build durably. And I think we have such opportunities to collaborate, to bring those voices to this conversation and collaborate with them to really, accelerate this culture shift.
Great. Leon.
I have so many COP wishes for local governments. I think we're seeing some very exciting developments. When it comes to the particular topic of the buildings, I think when we're here and we're discussing we're discussing between national governments. Essentially, that's the mechanism of a COP. And I just would like to then reiterate this wish for multi-level action and collaboration so that we really consult all the different levels of government in designing and implementing these solutions or agreements that we may come up with COP with.
Yeah, I love Laurie's wish, but I have a more high-level one, which is you will all be aware of the buildings breakthrough that's being launched at this COP. So I would love to see that as a pivotal moment for business and for cities, and a clear signal to governments to implement the policies that we talked about, and at an appropriate level. That would be my number one wish.
And that was mine.
Fabulous. Great. So, Laurie, Leon, Eva, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to speaking to here. I am not going to summarize, but perhaps one thing I've learned is no loop, slow loop, or close the loop. That's what we all need to work on. Last piece of advertising, we've done a circular city barometer. We've worked with 30 global cities using C40 data. It was collected, analyzed by Bloomberg Green. We've come up with a barometer. It's actually a ranking. I know you guys don't like ranking too much, but it's just to show number 1 is not very good and number 30 bad. It's not, it means they're all fabulous, but it's an illustration of what cities are doing and accelerate to do in their own. So if you want, come and see me, I'll give you a QR code where you can access all this barometer. It's there to share, just as the circular the
Buildings Toolkit.
The Buildings Toolkit is there. It's available on your website to share. Let's continue sharing. This is just one conversation. Let's continue to have conversation. Thank you for coming, and I wish you a successful rest of the day in COP. Thank you.